Disclaimer: this content is intended for a mature audience only. Viewer discretion is advised. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of rain against the glass. A lamp glowed softly in the corner, casting amber warmth across her bare wrist as she adjusted her bracelet, a nervous habit she hadn't outgrown. Mira sat on the edge of the bed, her breath shallow, her thoughts moving faster than her words ever could. Behind her, the soft rustle of fabric signaled his presence. Armin. Her husband. The man whose silence could speak entire paragraphs she could never finish. He said nothing at first, only watched her reflection in the mirror. That steady gaze, not possessive, not cruel, but searching, made her heartbeat shift in rhythm. There was history between them, not loud or obvious, but woven through years of quiet promises and near-broken trust. Tonight felt different though, charged yet tender, as if the air itself carried the weight of what was unsaid. When he finally spoke, his tone was low, calm, deliberate. "You trust me?" She nodded, though her voice caught before it could follow. "I want you to watch," he murmured, setting something small and metallic on the dresser. "Watch what happens when you stop trying to hold yourself together." Her pulse skipped. The words weren't meant to hurt, they were meant to unravel her, softly. She met his eyes in the mirror, the distance between them shrinking not with touch, but with understanding. That strange intimacy, the kind that asks for honesty, not perfection, filled the room like slow fire. Myra's lips parted, but no words came. The rain deepened. The reflection showed two people caught between control and surrender, not in a physical sense, but in emotion, trust, and the surrender of pride. And just as she leaned forward, ready to bridge the fragile space between them, the lamp flickered, and his expression changed. Something unspoken passed across his face, as if he was about to reveal something she wasn't ready to hear. The air thickened. The silence grew heavier. And in that unfinished breath, the night turned towards something neither of them could predict. The rain had settled into a rhythm now, slow, deliberate, like it was listening to them. Mira still hadn't moved. The faint reflection of Armin behind her held her attention, the kind that feels heavier than touch. She didn't need to turn around to know that he was studying her, the curve of her shoulder, the way her fingers brushed the edge of the dresser, the way she breathed when she was afraid to speak. They had been married for 5 years, and yet, tonight felt like the first time they were really standing in front of each other without armor. For months, they had drifted, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. Work, expectations, the slow erosion of routine. Words had become schedules. Touch had become memory. But now, something in the air had shifted. Mira remembered the early days, how Armin used to trace constellations on her skin just to make her laugh, how they'd stay up till dawn talking about nothing and everything. Somewhere along the way, the silence had grown louder than their laughter. But tonight, in the flicker of light and rain, that silence felt like an invitation rather than a wall. Armin's voice broke through gently. "Do you ever think about who we were before all this?" She hesitated. "Before what?" "Before we learned to pretend everything was fine." The words cut softly, like truth often does. She turned, finally facing him, not in defiance, but in quiet surrender. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were tired, tender, and full of something she hadn't seen in a while, hope, maybe. Her throat tightened. "You make it sound like I stopped trying." "I think we both did," he said, his voice low, almost an apology. The air between them pulsed, heavy, alive, charged not with anger but with unspoken yearning. He took one careful step closer, and though nothing else moved, the distance between them dissolved. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, a quiet reminder that storms sometimes cleanse more than they destroy. And as his fingers brushed hers, barely, hesitantly, Mira felt the night pause, waiting to see what they'd do next. Myra's pulse echoed in her ears, not from fear, but from recognition. That simple touch had awakened something that had been asleep too long, buried under unspoken resentments and quiet distance. She looked up at him, at Armin's face softened by lamplight, and felt a pang of something complicated, desire tangled with guilt, love shadowed by disappointment. The memory came rushing back, the night 2 months ago when she found the small gift box on her dresser, unopened, still wrapped in silver paper. He had left it there with a note that said only, "For when you're ready to feel again." She never opened it. Not because she didn't care, but because she wasn't ready to admit how far they drifted. That box had sat untouched ever since, collecting dust and meaning she couldn't face. Now, as her eyes flicked toward the corner of the room, she saw it again, the box. Unopened, still patient. Armin followed her gaze. His expression shifted. "You never opened it." "I didn't know if it was meant to fix us," she whispered, "or remind me that we needed fixing." He exhaled slowly, stepping back as if to keep from saying what he wanted to say. The rain pressed harder against the windows, the thunder growing closer. Between the flashes of light, the room seemed to breathe with them, their silence, their unfinished sentences, their fragile hope. Myra's thoughts wandered back further, to the day she told him she wanted more than routine. More laughter, more honesty, more feeling. He had looked at her then like a man standing in the middle of an ocean, unsure how to swim back. And yet here he was tonight, trying. "I didn't want to fix you," he said softly. "I wanted to remind you of what you already are, the part of you that used to look at me like I was home." Her eyes stung, not from sadness but from recognition. He was right. Somewhere along the way, she had built walls so high she forgot what she was protecting. She reached for the box at last. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the lid, and whatever was inside caught her breath, her eyes widening just as lightning split the sky outside. Armin took one step forward. "Mira," he said, voice low and steady, "are you ready to remember us?" The storm outside roared, and the story paused on the edge of something irreversible. Myra's fingers lingered over the open box, her breath catching in the dim light. Inside lay not something extravagant or shocking, but a small, carefully polished piece of glass shaped like a teardrop, delicate, luminous, almost alive. It shimmered faintly under the glow of the lamp, as if holding the reflection of her uncertainty. Armin watched her silently, every line in his face taut with things unsaid. "It's not what you think," he murmured. "It's a symbol of what we lost, and what we could still find." She looked up, her pulse trembling against her ribs. "You think one gesture can undo all that distance?" "No," he said, stepping closer. "But it can remind us how to feel again. To stop pretending we're fine." The rain drummed louder, the sound wrapping around them like a second heartbeat. Myra's eyes flickered between the object in her hand and the man who once made her feel invincible. The quiet between them stretched, long, fragile, electric. "I used to think falling apart meant weakness," she whispered. "But maybe that's the only way we can rebuild." He smiled faintly, the sadness behind it almost beautiful. "Then let's fall apart together." Something in his voice cracked through the last of her defenses. She wanted to hate him for waiting this long, for making her carry the silence alone. But she couldn't. Because now, standing in front of him, she saw the man who had tried, not perfectly, but honestly. Armin reached out, his hand stopping just short of her cheek. The air between them pulsed, every breath charged with the ache of things long withheld. Mira didn't move away. She met his eyes, steady, vulnerable, searching, and for a moment, the world outside vanished. The thunder outside rolled again, closer this time, as if echoing the storm inside her. She could feel her heartbeat rising, her thoughts blurring into sensation and memory. The tension was unbearable, not physical, but emotional, spiritual, the kind that demanded honesty, that stripped everything else away. And then, just as his hand brushed her face, a sound from outside broke the moment, a knock, faint but distinct, at their front door. Both froze. The storm outside grew darker, the lamp flickered, and the fragile moment shattered into uncertainty. The glass teardrop slipped from Myra's hand and hit the floor, not breaking, but trembling where it landed. The knock echoed again, soft, uncertain, but it didn't belong to the storm. Myra's breath caught mid-silence. Armin's hand froze in the air, his expression shifting from tenderness to quiet alarm. The air between them changed. What had been heat and closeness turned to tension, sharp and fragile. "Were you expecting someone?" she asked, voice trembling. He shook his head slowly. "No one should be here." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then the knock came once more, deliberate this time, as though whoever stood outside knew exactly what they were interrupting. Mira stepped back, instinctively clutching the fallen glass teardrop from the floor. Its surface shimmered faintly, reflecting their unease. Armin crossed the room and paused at the door, the sound of the rain swelling like a drumbeat. When he opened it, a woman stood there, drenched, breathless, her eyes wild with emotion. "Armin," she whispered. "I didn't know where else to go." The words fell like glass shattering. Myra's stomach turned cold. She recognized the voice instantly, Layla. The woman Armin once worked with. The one whose name had become a quiet ghost in their marriage, never mentioned but never forgotten. For a long second, no one spoke. Layla's gaze flicked to Mira, then back to Armin, guilt flickering across her face. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I just needed to tell you the truth." Armin's expression was unreadable. "This isn't the time." "It has to be," she insisted, her voice trembling. "Before you keep living a lie." Myra's breath hitched. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "What lie?" she asked quietly. Layla hesitated, eyes darting between them. "The night of the conference, he didn't do what you think he did." "I did." Her voice cracked. "He tried to stop me." "You left him before he could explain." The words struck like lightning. The argument, the silence that followed, the distance, all of it rewound in Myra's mind, crashing together into new meaning. She turned toward Armin, heart pounding, confusion and guilt colliding. He looked at her, not pleading but raw, exposed. "I tried to tell you," he said softly. "You just wouldn't hear me." Myra's eyes filled, her breath breaking as the storm raged outside, and inside her, too. The air hung thick with the storm's weight, rain hammering the windows, thunder folding into silence. Mira stood between the two of them, heart racing, the glass teardrop trembling in her palm. Layla's confession had ripped through the room like a blade, but what followed wasn't rage, it was disbelief, and the slow ache of realization. Armin looked exhausted, as if he had been carrying the truth for too long. "I never betrayed you," he said softly, his voice shaking. "But when you walked away, I thought I deserved it. Because somewhere, I stopped reaching for you." Mira felt the words land, gentle, heavy, undeniable. She remembered that night clearly now, the phone unanswered, her anger unspoken, her heart already halfway closed. Maybe they had both built this distance, one unspoken assumption at a time. Layla's eyes glistened. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I came here because you both deserve the truth. Whatever happens after, you should face it together." Then she turned and left, swallowed by the sound of rain, leaving behind a silence so complete it almost hummed. Mira stared at the door, her throat tight. "I spent months hating you for something you didn't do." Armin took a step closer, his voice low, steady. "And I spent those same months wishing you'd hate me less, even if I couldn't make you love me again." Tears blurred her vision. The teardrop in her hand caught the lamplight, scattering tiny reflections across the walls, like fragments of what they once were. Slowly, she placed it back on the dresser. "You said this was a symbol," she murmured. He nodded. Of us. She shook her head softly, a faint smile forming through her tears. No. Of how fragile we became, and how we didn't break. The moment stretched, delicate, trembling, full of quiet forgiveness. He reached for her then, no grand gesture, no rehearsed words, just a hand resting gently against her cheek, a silent promise that maybe, just maybe, they could start again. Outside, the storm began to ease, and for the first time in months, the air felt lighter. But as Mira looked into his eyes, she noticed something she hadn't before, a small scar at his temple, faint and new. She touched it softly, realization dawning. You never told me you were hurt. He smiled faintly. Some wounds don't bleed. They just wait for someone to notice. And in that single truth, quiet, human, and real, their story finally found its breath again. When the storm finally broke, dawn followed quietly, a pale blush spreading across the sky, soft and forgiving. The house felt different now, lighter, as if the air itself had exhaled. Mira stood by the window, watching sunlight filter through raindrops clinging to the glass. Everything looked freshly made, fragile, beautiful, alive. Armin joined her, his steps unhurried, the silence between them no longer sharp but calm. He handed her a cup of coffee, their fingers brushing just long enough to say what words couldn't. For the first time in a long while, there was peace, not perfect, but real. Layla's visit had left echoes, but not bitterness. If anything, it had been a strange kind of gift, the truth finally spoken aloud. Mira had spent so long holding her heart like a fortress, now she realized love didn't need protection. It needed openness, even when it hurt. She turned toward Armin. You didn't give up on me, even when I gave up on us. He smiled faintly. We both found our way back. Just not the way we expected. Outside, the rainwater glistened along the street, reflecting the rising light. Mira thought about how everything fragile, glass, hearts, promises, could survive if held gently enough. She glanced at the glass teardrop on the dresser. It no longer looked like sorrow, but something transformed, a reminder that even the things that nearly break us can become proof that we lived, loved, and endured. Armin reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. No grand speeches. No vows. Just presence, quiet, steady, whole. They stood together, facing the world beyond the window, knowing that storms would come again but no longer fearing them. As the light grew stronger, Mira rested her head against his shoulder and whispered, almost to herself, maybe falling apart wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning. And in that small, steady moment, two hearts, rebuilt and reborn, the story closed on a single truth. Sometimes the most beautiful way to love is to finally stop pretending you're unbroken. We didn't fall apart, we finally fell into who we were meant to be.